y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates. And today we're gonna talk about how to be a successful home buyer in a shifting housing market. Last year, I recorded a video called How to Be a Successful Buyer in a Seller's Market. And in that video, I talked about how you can pay the highest price, have the best terms most favorable to the seller, and how you can remove all the contingencies in your contract. And I gotta say, nobody wants to watch that video or hear those things. But in reality, over the last year plus in the Seattle housing market, in order to be successful, and this was the same in a lot of real estate markets across the country, maybe more so in Seattle than in most, you had to make an offer that the seller wanted to accept above all the other offers. Essentially, you're competing with other buyers for the limited amount of houses on the market. Well, that's changed here over the past 4 or 5 months, especially in the higher priced markets. And I know a lot of agents across the country, and they've been telling me that they've been experiencing this a lot more, and they've been having a little bit of a delay to this, but they're experiencing these same pullbacks as we've been experiencing here in Seattle since the end of the spring. In this video, I want to share with you a little bit of how the market's changed, specifically when it comes to the negotiations, but I also want to give you a few tactics to be a successful buyer in this shifting market climate. We're by no means in a buyer's market. That would be a completely different conversation, and that's pretty much where every house is up for grabs. Sellers are just praying and hoping that somebody wants to buy their house, and that's definitely not the market that we're in. I know the news sounds a little bit daunting when you talk about and hear about home prices coming down a little bit, and you hear about inventory rising and a lot more houses on the market. That is true, but there is by no means a fire sale right now in real estate, and I don't really think there's going to be one in the Seattle area, but that's a conversation for a different video. Let's talk about how the market has changed, all right? And I'm gonna talk about it in terms of real estate negotiations, because for me, a real estate negotiation is boiled down to a few basic things. You've got the price, that's how much you're paying for the house. You have the terms in the contract, that's what you're essentially offering for that price. That's things like the amount of earnest money deposit, that's your good faith deposit, that's your closing date, that's the amount of time maybe the seller gets to stay in the house after closing, it's how quickly you close. I mean, there's so many little idiosyncrasies to the terms, but I think sometimes sellers want special things. They want to keep light fixtures, they want to take plants, they want to have you close in 2 weeks, but that might not be the best thing for you as a buyer. So terms are very flexible, and also contingencies, those are protections in the contract for you. So terms are just what it is, right? These are the terms, we've agreed to the price and these terms, but the contingencies are opportunities for you as a buyer to put in some additional, I'd call them emergency brakes, right? You've got opportunities around mainly financing, right? So most people are getting a home loan, statistically about 85% in the last year in King and Snohomish counties, if we put it together, are getting a home loan. And in those cases, a financing contingency protects you if you lose your job or if the appraised value of the home is less than what you're paying. Not really seeing that right now, by the way, but you were seeing that. In the early spring, it's hard for an appraiser to essentially value a house for more than what all the other ones sold for a month before, but that's kind of what the challenge was, right? And right now we're seeing houses selling for less than before, so it's pretty much a slam dunk appraisal, if that makes sense. But financing is a huge protection, and then the inspection, another huge protection for a buyer, the opportunity to inspect the home afterwards, especially when you're under contract. You have then the opportunity to maybe negotiate items, maybe have the seller make repairs or give you some money towards some of your closing costs or other related costs in the transaction. But for a buyer to be able to have some kind of wiggle room here on the price, terms, or contingencies is a novel idea, at least here over the past few years. So again, the last year and a half, 2 years, right? Mid-2020 till early spring of 2022, it's essentially been, if you want to buy a house in almost every situation, maybe outside of the houses maybe that are less desirable or locations that are less desirable, you're going to have the highest price, the best terms and the fewest contingencies. And whatever combination came up with that is usually the offer that won in a multiple offer situation, right? Sellers get to choose what they want. Well, over the past 4 or 5 months, there have been houses that get one offer. And now we're seeing houses that are getting no offers at their offer review dates, right? Sellers were in a position where they could just say, hey, we're looking at offers in a week. Bring me your best offer. And now people would really like to have an offer in a week, but it's taking a month, 2 months in a lot of cases, sometimes longer to sell a house. So again, that's more normal, right? We're not entering into a buyer's market, but we're entering into a normal market. So as a buyer, you're not going to be able to get a super cheap price, really great terms, and every contingency in the book. Probably not going to happen right now. In a buyer's market, yeah, definitely. But right now there's some wiggle room. And I'd say if we're looking at as a whole, I think sellers are still struggling with price, right? That's a hard one when you think about your neighbor selling for $100,000 more than you 5 months ago. But the terms and the contingencies are the easiest ones to start to negotiate. I think price comes last. But again, there's different ways to go about this. So maybe an A buyer looked like all of this earlier on in the year, but now as a buyer, you have the opportunity to have 1 or 2 of these be in your favor versus in the seller's favor. So I think that's a huge win. I think the other thing is you have options as a buyer. There are way more choices of houses. And really sellers are, quote unquote, competing for buyers versus the other way around. Now in a true buyer's market, that's really what it's like. Right now, again, it's becoming a more balanced market. We're not quite there yet, but in most cases, there's a lot more options and buyers get to choose which house they like best versus just taking the first house, right? FOMO, fear of missing out, was a huge contributor to that. Buyers are like, I just want to get a house. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get one, but hey, this one's good enough. Let's do it, right? And now they're like, I kind of like all 3 of these. Which one do I like the best? I think timing is another thing, okay? So timing is in your favor as a buyer right now. We've already seen price reductions over the last couple months. We're seeing list prices starting lower. Now, is it a fire sale? No, but you're already in a position to get a better price than some of your neighbors did a couple months before. So as a buyer, you're already in that sweet spot of timing, and timing the market's really hard, right? If you're ready to go and you can do it, and you need a place to live, that's going to be the ideal timing in a lot of cases for somebody to buy a house. But if you're in that spot where it's just so happening to line up now, well, you're buying a house at a lot better time maybe than somebody 6 months to a year ago. But even a year ago, prices were a lot lower. So anyways, again, another conversation. But as a buyer, I think you're in this zone of opportunity. We don't know how long it's going to last. I certainly am not going to project on it, but I think a lot of people are thinking 6 months to a year. So if I was to say, that's probably that window. Again, it gives you more negotiation power as a buyer, right? More options equals more abilities to negotiate in this situation. So for a buyer, I think if you want to be successful in this market, in a shifting market, again, we don't know what the future holds, right? I think that's the unknown. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So I think there is potentially this fear of participating as a buyer in this market because you're like, well, what happens if interest rates keep going up on mortgages into the 7s or 8s and prices keep coming down? I don't know. I really don't. And I can't answer that question for you. I think what we're seeing over the past few months is that interest rates have actually been going down because there's more confidence in the government's ability to control inflation. So I think the stock market's been rallying. I think that what we're seeing recently is a little bit of a leveling off or a recalibrating, I guess, of expectations, but also of the understanding of where we're at right now in the economy. Now, again, we don't know what the future holds, but I think that's a good thing. As we're looking at the negotiations, though, as a buyer, timing, that's tough, right? It's hard to predict. But I think what we do know is that we have room to negotiate on price. So if we're looking at number 1 on our opportunities or our tactics, buyers, number 1 is price. I think unless you really like the house and you're like, I've got to get this one, maybe you let it go past its offer review date, if it has one. Because sellers are most likely going to be more firm on their price after a week. But if it sits for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, now all of a sudden timing's on your side as a buyer. And statistically, most price reductions are going to be in that 3 to 5% range. So if you're like, you know what, I would pay asking price for this house, but I'd love to get it for 5% less, well, give it a couple weeks and make an offer before the price drops. And I think you have an opportunity as a buyer to get a better price. So again, number one is that price in the negotiations. And I think, yeah, if you're offering right out of the gate, probably have less opportunity to get a better price. But if you're willing to be patient and this isn't the house that you absolutely want to have, right? If it is, maybe it's not worth waiting a couple weeks and missing out. Because some of the good houses are still selling really fast in the good neighborhoods, right? But if this is one where you're like, you know what, I like this. This is an 8 to a 9. I would love to live here. I can see myself here, but I could see myself here for $20,000 less. Well, let's watch it. Let's keep an eye, right? So that's what I've been doing with a few clients on some different properties. And it's paid off for some, and others, they missed out. The house is gone, right? Somebody else was willing to buy it for that price. So I think price is the first part. I think terms in the contract are another huge piece of the puzzle right now. And I think this can go one of two ways. As a buyer, you can leverage your terms and make them more favorable to the seller and potentially negotiate a better price even, right? If the seller knows, man, I'm gonna get a large earnest money deposit, I'm going to close in 3 weeks, I'm going to get their firstborn child, I'm just kidding, but that's how it was over the past few years, right? They're gonna buy me pizza dinner, something cool like that. If they know they're gonna get the stronger terms, they may be more flexible on the price. And I think that comes with the contingencies too, right? There's a hybrid of those two. And we'll talk about that. But we can also go the other way. Maybe you pay a little bit more, or you make an offer that's favorable to you in all the ways, and maybe we can negotiate the terms and the contingencies, but not the price. But if we get terms that are maybe more favorable to you, a really low earnest money deposit, maybe you're putting a $5,000 earnest money deposit down, which could be 0.5% or 1% of the purchase price versus 3 to 5% or more, which we've been seeing here in the past couple of years. That's huge for you as a buyer, especially if you're putting a lower down payment. So if the statistical first-time home buyer is 5 to 7% down payment, right, on a conventional loan, you probably don't want to put your entire down payment as an earnest money deposit, and you have an opportunity not to do that right now. Now, I think the terms here, again, these are very flexible. It's really what the seller and the buyer want to agree on. So as a buyer, there are opportunities. Maybe you don't want to move into the house in 2 weeks. Maybe you want it to take 45 days instead of 2 weeks. Well, the seller may be agreeable to that if you pay them the right price because they want to sell their house. So there are, again, a lot more opportunities for wiggle room here. I think the contingencies is the other big thing, and I would almost argue for a buyer, this is probably the most welcomed relief. Over the past few years, it's been so hard to get a house that you really had to put everything out on the table. It's like if you're a poker player and you're going all in, right? There's no options. There's no chance to back out. If I don't win right now, like I lose all my chips, I'm going home. And so that's how buyers have had to face these negotiations. And contingencies are those protections in the contract for you. They're your opportunities to back out. They're your protections in case something bad happens. If you're getting a financing contingency, you're able to protect and mitigate against the risks with financing, like losing your job or a drastic increase in interest rates, and now you can't afford to purchase the house. If you didn't have those previously, all of a sudden now you're on the hook. You still got to buy the house, or you could back out, but you lose your earnest money deposit, right? Who wants to lose a $50,000 earnest money deposit because they can't perform on the contract? It doesn't happen regularly, but it can happen, right? It's a risk factor that can be mitigated. Inspections, another huge contingency in the contracts. In a more balanced market, buyers have the opportunity to inspect a home after they're under contract and then maybe ask for repairs or negotiate credits towards closing costs. So I've had multiple clients recently been able to take advantage of these contingencies, specifically the inspection, to get some credits, have some work done, right? That's awesome. And I've also seen clients get better prices and better terms. So we've been able to leverage all three of these different factors. The other contingency that is not very common in a competitive market, it's almost non-existent, is a home sale contingency. So if you have a house to sell and you want to buy another house, but you need to sell the other house first, The best way to do that as a buyer, ideal way to do it, is to be able to purchase the new home with a contingency of selling that other house. But if the seller gets to choose between a lot of offers, that one's like thrown off the table, right? It's not even in the conversation. So I think right now there's that contingency or that option for buyers to sell their house after being under contract and work it all out really beautifully. So as a buyer, you've got some opportunities. We can negotiate on the price, right? We can negotiate on the terms, or we can negotiate on the contingencies, and we don't just have to put it all out there and say, hey, what do you want? My calls to sellers, agents used to be, okay, what does your buyer want as far as terms go? What does your buyer want in the contingencies category? Does your buyer have expectations of price? Do you have other offers on the table? How many offers do you have on the table? Do you have any that are over this price? What, right? Those are the types of questions we're asking. And listing agents, and I did the same thing, we're even producing a document that said, this is what our client would like to see. Oh, and of course, just give us the best price you can. So that is gone right now. Sellers just want to sell their house. So can we negotiate on all three of those? A lot of times sellers, we're going to want to see something, right? Maybe they want to see a little higher earnest money deposit. They want to see you waive the inspection. But if you do, maybe they'll give you like an 8%, 10% discount. What? Because they want to sell their house and there's a guarantee there. Again, time on the market is a huge thing if you're a buyer to take advantage of. If a house has been sitting for 2 to 3 weeks, they haven't adjusted the price, or the house, maybe it did just have a price reduction, but again, it's been on another week or two. That's where there's opportunities, because sellers, again, have equity. And I've talked about this previously, that right now we have historic levels of equity in a home. It means their house is worth so much more than what they paid for it and what they have leveraged. So like even for me, even though the market shifted a bunch, 5 years ago we bought the house we're in and it's still got $500,000+ of equity in it. It's crazy. It's crazy. So could I sell for a little bit less and be just fine? Yeah, and I have a huge fat check. And I think that's the way a lot of people feel right now. So it's not a market where we're up against short sales in most cases or foreclosures or anything like that. And even if we were up against a foreclosure, people can still sell their house and profit. So we're not in that type of an environment where we're not even really close to it. Unless you bought a house in the last 6 months and all of a sudden you have to sell your house. But most people have so much equity in their home that they're able to negotiate prices. And if they're nervous about it at all, they might be more willing. For buyers right now, there's lots of opportunity in the market. Again, prices have been coming down, and you have a lot of opportunities to negotiate. So good for you. Not as great for sellers, but that's just the way it is. The market's always shifting and changing, and the dynamics are always changing. So if we find ourselves in a seller's market again, that other video I mentioned earlier, that'll be helpful. But really think about price, terms, and contingencies. And in a seller's market, right, where the sellers have the advantage, you got to do everything. When you're in a more balanced market, there's room for negotiation over maybe one or two of those different things. And if the market ever did get into, and it will someday get into more of a buyer's market category, then again, you're probably going to be able to leverage all three of those different parts of the negotiation in your favor. Thanks so much for watching this video as we talk about some of the strategies that you can use as a buyer to win in negotiations right now as the real estate market is shifting. If you want to talk a little bit about how to take advantage of this in your individual situation, or you just want to talk about whether it's the right time to buy or sell here and you're in the Seattle area, I'd love to chat.